Ja, lieber Martin Sch
Well, dear Martin Schulz, dear Sabine Fandrich, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, excellencies, dear friends,
vielen Dank, dass
thank you very much for the organization of this conference. I think it's a good thing that we have such a place in order to discuss these issues, in order to debate the Zeitenwende and what it means. These are moving times in which we are coming together. I would like to start my speech by coming back to Antonio Gramsci, an Italian author and intellectual, who once said, well, in a crisis, the old is no longer there and the new has not yet appeared. So at the moment, we are living in a time of diverse crises: war, a pandemic, climate, social the difficulties. So the crises are increasing and they are reinforcing each other, and they present us with basic questions that we have to answer as societies. So as the chairman of the party, we have to shape our future and we have to do it together. This is my approach. Sometimes you write history and sometimes you only know many years later what epochal change it was that you underwent. But there are also moments where you see right in this moment that this moment is a historic moment, that this moment is going to change the history, that it's going to have a direct, a sustainable impact on all of our lives. When I was 11 years old, the wall came down here in Berlin and the Cold War ended. This was such a historic moment. The idea of communism died and was dead, and there was only one path towards the future: the liberal democracy. The opposition of the systems was dissolved. The idea to suppress people behind walls had disappeared, and I couldn't understand it, but it already characterized me when I was 11 years old. The fact that there was this attempt. When I was 23 years old, I did an apprenticeship in New York, and I saw 9/11 as an eyewitness, and I experienced it as an eyewitness. And these attacks changed my view on the world. They have changed me. They have also changed my view of the Federal Armed Forces and my approach to security policy. And now, February the 24th, 2022, the start of the war of aggression against Ukraine, this was actually a turning point. This was a Zeitenwende which took place right at the heart of Europe. And this Zeitenwende shows us that we are faced with a huge task. The old thing has disappeared and the new has not yet appeared, not yet started. I'm no longer 11 years or 23 years old. I'm 44 by now, and I'm the chairman of the party SPD, and I am bearing responsibility for this country. And at the morning of the 24th of February, I did not have the answers to this Zeitenwende. I'm sure that we all were shocked. We did not have answers at the time, but I knew immediately that this moment would change everything, that this moment would shape the political agenda of the upcoming years. This is going to be the major task of my generation, to find answers and to draw the right consequences from this change. It will demand a lot of us. It marks a turning point, and it will have an impact on all our lives, on the politics of the next 10, 15 or 20 years. The Russian president Vladimir Putin started this war. He is responsible for this war, for the suffering, for the killing of the Ukrainians. It's an attack on the sovereignty of a European country. We are not responsible for Putin's war. But we, of course, also have to be self-critical. We have to ask ourselves, what should we have done differently before February the 24th? But we also have to ask ourselves, what are the consequences concerning the future? And we will have to implement it. So it's our responsibility to fill the Zeitwende with life, and this is also the idea of this conference. I am grateful to the Friedrich Ebert Foundation and Mr. Schulz that you have created this space for a debate, that at a time of upheaval you have organized this space for debate in which we can reflect and discuss, but it's also a Tiergarten conference where we can try to give answers to this new era that is about to start. We are in an interim phase between the old and the new, and it's very important that we come together in order to discuss that. I myself was traveling a lot over the past days and months, and I had many discussions. I went to Stockholm, to Lisbon, to Madrid, and to other cities. I had intensive talks on the Zeitenwende, on this turning point. And over the past weeks, I met many representatives of other parties in Berlin over the past weeks and months, from think tanks and also journalists, and we discussed the challenges that are lying ahead of us. And over the past days, I tried to summarize my ideas and to come up with some theses and put it into this speech. Of course, this is not meant to be comprehensive and covering all, but I would like to invite you to continue the discussion and to think further. I think this is very important. It's very important for society, for the Social Democratic Party, that we conduct this discussion, that we have this discussion. So where are we coming from? After the mass murder of European Jews, which was conducted by the German Reich and the two world wars, we as Germany were reintegrated into the international community of states. It was actually a miracle that the Federal Republic of Germany, first and later on the unified Germany, could become a partner again of the international community that quickly. But still, history has shown us that we need to be, and taught us that we need to be cautious. The European policy has become part of our understanding. After that, we saw a bipolar world emerge. We saw the blocks, either east or west, capitalism or communism. This system emerged, and this world order was the world order that accompanied us for many decades. But this world order abruptly ended in 1989. Reunification, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So the Western model self-asserted, and the West basically won. And for many, it was just a matter of time until the democracies, liberal democracies, would be everywhere. Simon Huntington wrote about a wave of democratization, and Fukuyama wrote about the end of history. But we know that history never ended. I'm firmly convinced that our social model, the model of a democratic, of a free society, is the best model. But simply because I think this is the best model, or because we think this is the best model, does not mean that the rest of the world sees it likewise. The West was quite sure that the future would only know one end, and a war between European states seemed incomprehensible. And for decades, we believed in the inviolability of borders, and everything was put into international treaties and international law. And we have to now see that we were actually not awake enough, so to speak. When there were some obstacles, we still believed in our model. We still believed that the rule-based order would self-assert, but we neglected that things were developing in a different direction. The signals from Russia should have been interpreted in a different way. At least since 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, Russia is a dictatorship now, and also China has a completely different vision of society than we have. But it's also part of the truth that many states in the global south were disappointed and are disappointed of the promises of liberal democracies. So far, the major political players could be sure of their support, but in the future, the world will be different. We will no longer have different poles, but different centers, which will exert power in different ways. It's no longer a matter of allegiance. It's no longer a matter of oppression, but it's about convictions and interests. The power centers that we will see in the future will cause dependencies, and they are dynamic. So power will be exerted differently in the future than in the past. This new global order is for those states who are not yet a strong center and who have a political potential, is of an advantage, because you do not swear cohesions to or allegiance to a certain bloc. So the world order will become more flexible. It will be based on negotiations between states, which will become more and more important, but also reliable and trustful relationships. And we see the strategic action of China. It enhances its influence, connects states to it. It uses its political and economic power. For example, the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. And we also see it in Russia. Russia has managed to build up relationships to emerging states and to intensify these relationships. So there are alternatives to the Western development model. These alternatives have grown. Russia and China have over many years. Just a second. Have court countries like South Africa, Brazil, or others have given them a voice at the international level. They have seen the interests of these countries. They were respectful towards them and then created a trustful relationship. And we see the impact of it right now. We see how these states react when we want to impose sanctions on Russia, how they vote. For example, the vote in the UN shows that half of the world population is not standing behind our politics. This needs to make us think, not in terms of our decisions as such, but we have to think about our activities in those countries and how we act at the global political level.
The new world order is organized via centers, and from this we can deduce what we have to do. We have to create new alliances, partnerships. We have to offer open structures, just as Olaf Scholz is trying to do so with the International Climate Club. We need to be inclusive, or not exclusive, and create new structures at the global level. Create structures that create added value for everybody. And this is why we have to extend our strategic partnerships. And in the next months, we have to work closely with Latin America, with Asia, with Africa, and establish these partnerships, reinforce them when it's about the question of food. We are facing a food crisis, and we have actively do something against this. It's a consequence of Putin's war, but it is our responsibility to do something together. So we have to be more active in approaching the countries of the Global South, offer them cooperation. Their problems are also relevant for us. These are the global questions that aren't solved yet in the areas of technology, hydrogen, health, climate, and so on. And this is where we have to be active. It is our aspiration in Europe to become the first continent that is climate neutral in the world. We have to create innovation, we have to create standards, we have to create a just transition. We want to show that prosperity and climate protection can go together. And if we achieve this, then other regions and countries in the world will take this as a point of reference. They will want to embark on the same path, and it means we can be a good role model. But it's also clear on this path we will be dealing with countries that do not share our values or our idea of an open society. Nevertheless, we will have to cooperate with those countries. Every time we have to contemplate to what extent do we develop a cooperation? How will we compromise our values through such a cooperation? And this is why we need a reliable internal compass. We will never give up trying to work for change. We need an opinion values when we cooperate. Change through rapprochement should never again become change through trade. That's clear to me. Never again should we create such profound dependencies as we have done on the energy policy level with Russia. We have to extend our strategic autonomy. We have to produce these goods here in Europe and be independent from Russia. And also when it comes to China, we also have to become more independent with regard to technology and devices. That doesn't mean we shouldn't engage in trade with China or other countries such as China, but we have to be resilient and intelligent in choosing our cooperation. So we've had some years of insecurity. We will have some more years of insecurity when it comes to the new global world order. It is about competition. It is about relationship, dependencies, linkages, cooperation, and what we can mean with others. And we have to get ready for this competition. No state by itself will be able to deal with the challenges of a globalized world. As I've already said, we need centers that work together, alliances, and the European Union has to be such a center of power. Altogether, it's very important to me that we remain closely together as the West, being closely allied with the US, with Japan, with the United Kingdom, with Canada and others. There should be no doubt that we stand together as Europe. We need to fulfill our responsibility and we want to be the most attractive center of power in the world. What I've realized in the conversations of the past weeks, and it's become evident to me again, that a lot relies on Germany. Germany has to fulfill and also have this aspiration of becoming a leading power. After 80 years of being reluctant, we will have to assume a new role in the global world order. We have worked to get a high degree of trust in the past decades, and this means there are also now some expectations that we're facing. It became very clear to me in the past weeks, Germany is at the center of things, and I believe we need to fulfill these expectations. Being a leading power, doesn't mean we have to be brutal in doing so. I do hope that, similar to the culture of leadership we have in business or politics, that at the international level, it also becomes clear we need intelligent leadership. And that also includes the demand for a feminist foreign policy. Leadership means you have to be aware of your role. It means you have to approach others, convince others. Cooperation is integral to leadership because it makes good leadership. We need to be respectful, also towards those who do not share our opinions. And it also has to be very clear what motivates us. We do engage in foreign policy in order to make sure that people live in security and prosperity. US President Biden talks about foreign policy for the middle class. And I believe this approach is correct. Foreign policy is not a purpose in itself. It always has an effect on cohesion in our societies. And right now, we can see what tremendous costs are caused by shaking the international world order, supply chains that are interrupted. It all has an effect. And that means all international conflicts can be a force of implosion for our democratic cohesion. It's about our societies, and this is why engaging in foreign policy is so important. Domestic policy and foreign policy goes together. If we do accept this role of leadership, then we will have to face very tough decisions, financially, politically. We have to change structures. We have to rediscuss our budgeting. And I believe we also need a very different debate on security policy in Germany. We need spaces like this one here where we talk about security policy, but we need more of these debates and more spaces where we can get together and exchange. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the federal government have already reconsidered and reworked some fundamental principles of German foreign policy. We are in solidarity with Ukraine. We engage in tough sanctions. We deliver weaponry. We have established sanctions that Russia will feel for decades, and we engage in quite a lot of diplomatic pressure with our allies. It is right for us to do so, to take these steps, but that's all related to a new role as Germany. But altogether, if we look at the security policy debate, we also have to be critical. All of us in the past years, we did follow the security policy mainstream, and we neglected the defense of our own country and of our allies. I was visited by some colleagues, social democrats from Lithuania, and they talked about their fear that they will be next who will be aggressed by Putin. And I realized that I had this impulse to say immediately, no, don't worry, he's not going to do that. And then I realized this impulse, this has been the mistake and is our mistake. Mid of February, 2,000 experts on security came together at the Munich Security Conference, and only very few of them assumed that Putin will actually aggress Ukraine. And 4 days later, it happened. And until today, I wonder why we didn't see this coming. I believe we have to rethink scenarios. We have to be better prepared for scenarios that aren't even that likely to happen. When we hear from Poland, the Baltic states, that they're afraid that they might be Russia's next target, then we have to take it seriously. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz has made it clear. We will defend every centimeter of the NATO territory. So this is why I warmly welcome his decision to reinforce the German troops at the eastern flank, that we station and deploy more troops, that we intensify the protection of our eastern partners, and this also needs a better equipment of the German armed forces. When dealing with the Central European and Eastern European partners, we did make mistakes, and this is why personally I think it's very important to extend our dialogue, to intensify the debate, and to move ahead in Europe together. And this is why at the end of this week and next week, I will travel to Poland and Lithuania to have negotiations with my colleagues there. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very good that we have deployed the special fund of 100 billion euros for the German armed forces. That means we can close gaps. We can put the defense of our country and of our allies at the center of things. And this also emphasizes our protection of security for our citizens and for our allies. But I also believe that beyond these 100 billion euros, we need a different way of coping with the German armed forces within the society. The armed forces have been reduced again and again. Sites were closed down. There is no mandatory duty to enroll in the armed forces anymore. And the federal armed forces were only in the media when there were scandals. I had the impression that some people thought the less of the armed forces, the better, because it's going to be less likely that war is going to happen. But now we've realized that the contrary is true. And I've been dealing with this contradiction for a long while. I grew up as a son of parents who were soldiers. I grew up at the site of the armed forces. And I know what it's like when someone from my acquaintances dies in Afghanistan. I've been in the Defense Committee of the Parliament for 12 years, and often I was met with criticism when I was in favor of a strong army here in the society. But I want us to develop a new form of normality regarding the armed forces. We should take it for granted to meet them with respect, with recognition, because they serve our country and they go as far as necessary once the parliament decides on it. I want us to talk about peace and security, but to think about the armed forces as well. We should not look away from the reality of war. This is what we see in Ukraine. Peace politics, for me, also means using military force as a legitimate means of policy making if necessary. And this is also in conformity with the Charter of United Nations. It is always a last means, but it is a means that we can use in the international order. I assume that some of you might be alarmed by my words. The president of the Social Democrats is talking about military force, about leadership role, and so on. I think this might trigger some debates within the next days. But I have the ambition as a party that will remain realistic. And Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt, they've said the same. They knew that the basis for peace force is also military capacities and strength. The budget for defense was 3% of our GDP back then, and not less. Brandt and Schmidt, they understood this. We need to be strong ourselves, and then we can fight for human rights and for peace. And this is why I'm asking you, let us not have any shortcuts in the debates, as I've experienced in the past months. I'm very proud of the Eastern policy of Willy Brandt. He got the Peace Nobel Prize, and it was the basis for our unification. It made sure that we were able to overcome these blocks, and it made sure other countries in the Eastern Bloc were able to advance the democratic values that are enshrined in development policy and so on. They are a great fundament, and they remain so. Freedom, peace, international solidarity, these are important guidelines. Human rights, the rule of law, democracy, these are our goals as social democrats. And when I'm talking about the turn of a new era, the Zeitenwende, when I say that this requires a change of concepts and a change in what we've taken for granted, then that does not mean that I want us to throw everything out what has been important until now. No, a lot of things we have been doing in the past years and decades, it's important: diplomacy, international agreement, non-proliferation treaties, multilateralism, international financial policy. All these are means and instruments for a successful way of dealing with conflicts and preventing conflicts. They're part of a comprehensive social democratic security policy, and this will remain the case. And the most important thing, social democratic projects in foreign and security policy, it's Europe. When I was in Bommersvik in the past weeks, I learned that 50 years ago, Olof Palme, the Prime Minister of Sweden, he invited leading figures at the time to talk about the future of social democracy in Europe. It was a starting point that was launched by social democrats back then. They shaped this moment. I'm deeply convicted that we can do this again, and we need to do so for Europe, a new era. Social democrats are at the leadership in 8 governments in Europe. We're part of 13 governments. We are the biggest family of parties in Europe, and we have the opportunity to shape Europe for the future. As a leading power, Germany needs to fight for a confident Europe. We can only be strong if Europe is strong too. In the history of the European Union, we have learned what is possible if we want to do it politically, if there is willingness. Schengen, introducing the euro, the historical treaties of Maastricht, Lisbon, and so on, and also the recovery fund after COVID. These were all measures that were taken that had such a big scope and changed the life of so many people on this continent. The Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, visited the Balkan countries, Northern Macedonia in the past weeks, Albania, and he talked about upcoming negotiations for accessing the European Union, and the journey to Kiev that he did with other government leaders had a very important message. Ukraine is part of Europe. We are fighting for European values. With you, Europe will be stronger, and Moldova also needs to be a candidate for accession. The changing times, the turnover in an era is very important. The security order is reconfiguring itself. We have to orient ourselves to the European Union, and the Eastern countries are trying to do the same. And it shows what power we already have. We are attractive, but it also means we have a political responsibility. And for me, this includes a policy of extension. As a geopolitical actor, we have to have more weight in Europe after the end of the Cold War, and we've shown it already. We have acted geopolitically and strategically. It was a strategic goal to integrate the countries of the former Eastern Bloc into the European Union, to give a quick perspective for accession to the European Union. And I want us to do the same thing again, put a lot of political willingness into this accession. It doesn't mean they will have access to a fast track. Their criteria are standing. But it shouldn't get lost in the bureaucracy of Brussels. It should not peter out. We need to actively shape Europe as a geopolitical project. When we talk about the enlargement of the European Union, we also have to speak about reforms within. And I agree with a lot of people I talk to. This is the only way for us to become ready for these new members. We have to be able to act more quickly within the European Union. We have to thus abolish the principle of unanimity in fiscal policy. That means we'll be more democratic, we'll be faster to act. We should not make any compromise when it's about democracy and the rule of law. We need a new mechanism for ensuring the Copenhagen criteria and make sure that they'll be implemented also after the accession of a country. I've been thinking a lot what else I should propose in this speech, which might be taken up by journalists and so on. But I've realized that there's not a lack of ideas when it comes to the European Union. Everything's already on the table. We've been discussing it for years now. But a lot of things got lost in these long corridors of bureaucracy, and that means a lot of good ideas disappeared. We don't necessarily need new ideas, but we need to make Europe more political again and show that we're advancing on this continent, especially in these times. That's our biggest responsibility. I am convinced that we have to reform European defense and security policy. 27 countries have their own procurement, their own arm industries, and I cannot explain to anybody anymore why we do not coordinate this at the European level. I do know the arguments, but I think now we actually have to do it and implement it. And in the end, our goal should be to bundle resources, to develop a strong European pillar within NATO. European countries should be able to defend their own territory. And that's not any form of policy against the transatlantic alliance. It's something that would strengthen our transatlantic alliance. Apart from foreign and security policy, we also need to strengthen Europe within, strengthen social cohesion and invest into it. Everywhere in Europe, people are struggling with an increase in prices. The war threatens the social peace, and this is part of Putin's strategy. He's waging a war against European democracies. He wants to divide us from within. And that means we have to strengthen our societies in this crisis. We have to create cohesion. I've already mentioned the recovery COVID pandemic plan. We have already created a fund for unemployment, for labor affairs, and this has shown that we're ready to do so and that we are capable. In Spain and Portugal, I actually learned how important this was in the pandemic, how much it supported people on the ground. But now it's about going further. For example, reforming the Stability and Growth Pact. We need to enable flexibility in order to tackle future issues, digital transformation and environment. This is where we need to invest. And this is my last point. The transition is the issue of the future, ecological, economic, and a security policy transition. This has become clear since this war has started. In the coalition agreement, we have already agreed on ambitious aims, climate neutrality, investing in innovative technologies, renewable energies, and so on. The transformation has gained a new urgency because of the Zeitenwende. We are aware that we cannot do that against business and trade, but with them. We need to invest in renewable energies. We need to push for renewable energy sources, and thus this means several years of heavy investment. But what I can tell you, it's an investment into our long-term prosperity. We create the basis for good wages, for good jobs in Europe. And if I see that in Germany alone, there's a potential of 400,000 new jobs in Germany, then it becomes clear what opportunity this means for Germany, but also for Europe. We want to promote climate-friendly investment in Europe and thus create global standards. Renewable energies are the best source and the cheapest source for our future. And because it's also a security policy event, this is why I want to emphasize, this is an investment also in our independence, in our autonomy, in our security. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, the old has disappeared and the new hasn't yet arrived. Before I reach the end of my speech, I'd like to remind you of Willy Brandt, his speech on the International Socialist Congress in 1992. Willy was rather sick at that moment. He wasn't able to speak himself. Hans-Jochen Vogel read out the speech, what Willy Brandt wanted to share with future generations. I know that these words are very well known, but they're very up to date. What Hans-Jochen Vogel read out back then was nothing will come by itself, and very few things will be permanent. And this is why you have to think back about your forces, your capacity every time needs its answers. And thus, Willy Brandt formulated what social democracy has been about throughout history: cope with crisis, new situations, and draw conclusions that will improve the future. I believe in the unique shaping power of Europe. I believe in the power of social democracy and its convictions for a life in solidarity, prosperity, and freedom. I believe in the power of our democracy to shape our future. I believe that we can grow with the crisis, that we will be able to cope with them and create and shape a better future. In this speech, I've tried to sketch out some first idea how a new social democratic perspective on foreign and security policy can look like, policy that can lead us to a better future. I'm looking forward to the debate. I'm looking forward to contradictions. I'm looking forward to discussions today. Thank you so much.
Herzlichen Dank. Thank you very much.